Well now, welcome back everybody. Elisha Everette Whitley here. Happy birthday America and happy birthday to me. For some of you youngins out there, one might seem as old as the other, cause we're talking about a wide space of time. 150 consecutive years. Lord, I never thought I would live to see the day. Well now, I guess I really didn't, but you folks, my great-great-grandfamily, have made my memory live on for generations. Today marks our 150th family reunion. So let me begin by giving you the background of why we began this great tradition and why I hope you'll choose to keep it alive for generations to come. You've probably heard along the way that this reunion dates all the way back to the Civil War, and it's so. But what a terrible time that was. A country divided, and one of the bloodiest conflicts in our nation's history. Why, two of my brother Nathan's boys, Henry and Ben, never made it home alive, and I also lost my brother Jesse. So you can imagine that it was with a heavy heart that day in 1861 that I left behind my wife and children to pick up arms and fight for my beloved homeland. On my return, my sisters insisted on throwing me a party to celebrate my homecoming, but there was no time for such a thing. By the time I got home in the spring, why, the crops hadn't even been planted. So I had to get busy in the fields to feed a family that would eventually grow to 9 children. So they waited till my birthday, July 4th, 1865, to throw the best party you've ever seen. There was singing and playing and all the victuals you could eat. It was such a grand event, I suggested that we hold a reunion every year, and each year it just got better and better. Now our family of 9 children were the roots of this family tree that has grown hundreds of Whitleys high and wide. But every one of y'all here today is a descendant of one of these 9 branches. And a lot has happened since the first time we celebrated. Fact is, we've grown up right alongside this fine country of ours. Consider this. You know that right now I can look out across the crowd right here and see, I bet a dozen of y'all staring down at these little handheld telephones and pecking at it with your finger like a chicken after laying mash. Oh my, how things have changed. By the time my youngest daughter Ethel was born in 1867, you had never heard talk of someone picking up the phone and calling anybody. Why, it was that very year that Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. Now time went on, and from Virginia to Georgia, every one of the Confederate states had rejoined the Union. By 1879, another union had started the Whitley family tree branching out every which way. That's when my oldest, Sally Ann, married Charles Whitley, no relation by the way, and began a family that would total 8 children. My next oldest, Frank Whitley, married Alice Glover the same year the Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1883. Why, they had only just commenced laying the foundation at that time for the Statue of Liberty. 1891 was the year my next oldest sons, James Everett and Ben, got their families started. Dona Lee Whitley was James' first surviving child in a family that totaled 17 children between 2 different wives. And George Vernon Whitley was the first of 15 children born to Ben and Annie. That was also the same year that Thomas Edison invented the motion picture camera. Now don't you know we could have made some killer family movies through the years if we could have afforded such a machine? And before that same year was out, Sally Ann and Charles had their 5th child, Elvin Harold Whitley, enough to start their own basketball team. Now, there I go again, getting ahead of myself. That was just the week before the first game of basketball was ever played in Springfield, Massachusetts, invented by Dr. James Naismith. By the turn of the century, a company named Bayer invented the aspirin. And I'd say not a moment too soon, because in 1900, Frank and Alice's oldest girl, Lillian, snuck out of her bedroom window in the night to run off to Como with Henry Bailey to get married. Now this was also the year when the U.S. Post Office came out with their first book of postage stamps. Good thing too, because Frank and Alice were so upset, it was over a year before they'd even speak to Lillian's face again. But I guess it all worked out, because Lillian and Henry Bailey went on to raise a family of 9 fine children. And I ain't trying to name everybody, because at 8, 9, and 15 children a pop, we'd be here all day and all night, all right? But who can forget 1903, the year I passed away and was laid to rest at Blackjack Oak Cemetery, right on the Carolina-Virginia state line. Why, that was the same year the Wright brothers invented flight. So just as I was leaving, the Whitley Family Reunion was really just starting to take off. That's 38 reunions down and well over a century more to go. And everywhere you looked, the nation started picking up the pace. We had gone from the days of the horse and buggy to the horseless carriage. Henry Ford perfected the assembly line and started producing automobiles in record numbers. You could say that the Whitleys were getting around too. By now, the third generation of my family was taking root. Great-grandchildren were born during this period, like Elvin Harold Whitley Jr. From my daughter Toddy Edwards' family, Frances Bly was born, the only daughter of Annie and Clifton Bly. You know her today as Frances Bly Holt. Now that's one gal who's seen a lot of these reunions. My son Ben's oldest boy, George Vernon Whitley, married Blanny Britt. And during the period of World War I, between 1914 and 1918, the Whitleys started bringing the Worrells to the reunion, as Ben's oldest girl, Dora, married Fletcher Worrell. And 4 years later, James' oldest girl, Donna, married Fletcher's brother, Wallace Marvin Worrell. You know, times of war always bring back bad memories for me, and that period of the First World War brings me particular heartache for the family of my daughter, Mary Tom Holland. That's a branch that's literally fallen off the tree by now, because the whole family of 7 came down with tuberculosis and died. Now, I haven't mentioned my boy William yet. He lived to the ripe age of 87, and some of his great-grandchildren reported hearing cannons firing while they were working in the peanut fields in 1918. Maybe they thought World War I had come to America. Well, come to find out, they learned that those cannons being shot in Murfreesboro were to signal the end of World War I. And that just goes to show you how slow news traveled back then. All those fancy gadgets like the telephone, electricity, and radios had been out there for a while. Only problem was, most folks didn't have the money to buy them. But brighter days were ahead. In roared the 1920s. Yes, the times were changing fast. In 1923, Time magazine published its first issue. Now, that was the same year 2 more of my great-grandchildren were born, Roland Whitley and Reuben Clyde Whitley, better known as Punk. Also during the 20s, my daughter Lizzie Bailey, who had to sell the farm in Sunbeam when her husband James died and move her 9 children to Roanoke Rapids, was now getting acquainted with her grandchildren. Gilbert, Janet, Floyd, William, Roland, Marvin, Melvin, and more. I bet the old gal was teaching them all how to bait a hook on the banks of the Roanoke River, there in the rockfish capital of the world. While there were more cars than ever rolling off the automobile assembly line, there was one story from the 1928 reunion that had one car rolling into Winburn's Mill Pond. Turns out that Woodard Britt had just parked his new car at the top of the hill near my daughter Ethel Holland's house to let his family out. Well, I guess the old boy was so excited he forgot to pull the parking brake, and his new Essex went rolling down the hill, headed straight for the mill pond. That's when my 14-year-old grandson, Robert Whitley, saved the day and jumped behind the wheel to stop that car inches before it hit the water. You know, sometimes when you got it good, you get to counting your chicks before they hatch. And that was just what happened in America over the next 10 years. It became known as the Great Depression. Now just ask my great-grandson Punk Whitley, who says he never saw anything great about it. All most people saw was bad. He remembers his daddy, Wilbert, working up to 100 hours every week for only $12 pay. Grady Vaughn remembers peanuts selling for just a penny a pound. Now that ain't good if you're the one farming them for a living. Grady, who married Katie Sue Whitley, remembers getting paid just $1 for a week's work at the store at Barrett's Crossroads. Then he had to turn right around and use it to buy sugar, coffee, and flour. Let's face it, if you didn't grow it on the farm, you didn't eat much. But not everything was bad during the 1930s. In 1931, the Star-Spangled Banner became our national anthem, and the Empire State Building, America's tallest, opened in New York City. Another great-grandson with some tall aspirations for the Whitley Family Reunion, Marvin Worrell, was also born that very same year. Now, all of America struggled through the Great Depression, but found another rallying point in the 1940s when we entered World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And it was the very next year we welcomed another great-grandson to the family, Earl Bly, who you all rally around today as our master of ceremonies. Which reminds me, there have been a lot of hard-working people who have organized these reunions through the years, and by the 1940s, we had passed 75 consecutive years. Now, it was about that time that my grandson, Elvin H. Whitley, better known from Franklin to Suffolk as Santa Claus, started putting these family reunions together. Little did we know that a fifth-generation organizer was making her way into the world about that same time, and that'd be Julian Whitley's daughter, Nettie. You know her today as Nettie Boyce. So with the 50s comes a new generation, and keeping my dream alive is becoming a bigger and bigger job. The 50s in America was marked by an increase in manufacturing and home building. Sounds like a good opportunity for businessmen like my great-grandson David Whitley, who started a successful construction business in Suffolk in 1959.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, you're crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. Well, you ain't never caught a rabbit and you ain't no friend of mine. Well, they said
once again, our world was changing and music was a growing part of our culture. Elvin Harold Whitley III, or Hal as you knew him, was what you call your musical prodigy. While the young'un took to playing the piano at 5 years old and went on to make it his life's work.
close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Remember, I'll always be true. And then while I'm away, I'll ride home every day, and I'll send all my loving to you.
Part of another bunch who'd been picking and grinning for years were two of James Everette Whitley's boys, Irvin and George. You might have known them as the Cotton Pickers, or later as part of the Moonlighters. In the late 60s, George was a regular guest musician on the Bob Williams TV show on WTAR in Norfolk, and also on TV stations in Greenville. George, Irvin, and the Moonlighters kept y'all entertained into the 70s. And all the while, George teamed up with Thelma Rayford, Roland Whitley, and Marvin Worrell to organize this event for many years to come. You know, life in America during the 70s was pretty much what y'all saw in the 60s, except that culture, politics, and technology gadgets were set on a collision course. As the Vietnam War came to an end, political activists brought a whole mess of other issues for folks to fuss about. And I suppose us Whitleys were no different. But I also know that we've been a patriotic bunch from the very beginning, and we've had a number of our men and women through the years proud to do their duty for God and country. One that comes to mind is Nan Lee Mowry's son, Jim. In 1971, Jim Mowry was named the top of his Army Rangers class. As a proud great-great-grandfather, it makes me just want to stand and salute. The 1980s were a welcome relief from the government and economic problems in America. People got to hearing a little extra jingle in their pockets and started reinvesting in business, remodeling and sprucing up and such. And the Whitleys saw it no different. The cemetery at Blackjack got some extra TLC, and right in time for a military monument dedication in memory and honor of the Whitley family members who served in the Confederate Army. What a glorious day to see so many of my kin from 1986 assembled together at Blackjack Oak Cemetery. And to make sure the cemetery was managed and maintained with proper financial support for years to come, Carter Whitley, Marvin Worrell, and his son Steve were named as Black Jack's original trustees.
Look around, everywhere you turn is heartache. It's everywhere that you go.
Then prances in the 1990s, bringing in multiculturalism, alternative media, and a lot of other big old fancy words that's another language to this old country boy. Music was changing too. What began in the 70s was starting to blossom and take shape in every which way.
Here is the dome, back with the bass, pajamas live in effect, and I don't waste time on the mic with a dope rhyme. Jump to the rhythm, jump to the rhythm.
The rave scene, grunge, and hip hop. Sounds more to me like a party of filthy rabbits jumping around. Oh well, it looks like cable TV and the internet are here to stay, so I might as well get with it and change with the times. Know what I'm saying? Sports was becoming a bigger and bigger part of our way of living. And in 1991, my great-great-grandson Ken Whitley was voted into the Virginia Tech Hall of Fame for his outstanding play on the football field back in the 60s.
When you want it the most, there's no easy way out. When you're ready to go.
Then on to a new millennium, the year 2000. Now you might have noticed that up till now, I hadn't made too much fuss about my youngest daughter, Ethel Whitley Holland's family. Well, for one, there weren't too many of them, and they didn't have any children that had any children. So that's another branch that dies right on the tree sooner or later. But in this case, it was much later. My granddaughter, Mary Holland Hurst, was born in 1900 and was the first Whitley on this tree to turn 100 years old. And right as the calendar turned over to a new century in the year 2000. And for years, she lived right at the spot where we held a mini family reunion at Winburn's Mill Pond. In fact, she was laid to rest at that very location in 2005 at the age of 105. Now, if you think politics and government were messed up in the 70s, you ain't seen nothing yet. The first decade of 2000 had it all, but it was still a time for the Whitleys to shine, and I mean gold medal shine. Joey Cheek, my great-great-great-grandson, got worldwide attention at the 2002 and 2006 Winter Olympic Games. He's won bronze, silver, and gold medals for speed skating and broke world records doing it. I gotta tell you, I'm just as proud of the boy for his humanitarian efforts too, donating all his prize money to charitable social causes. Now speaking of social, there ain't nothing more antisocial than not being able to talk to someone's face, but that's what they tell me social media is all about. In fact, if you want this great day to continue for another 150 years, we need to keep telling the story in ways that our 5th, 6th, and 7th generations want to hear it. That's why in 2010, we entered the electronic age. Now, I'm not talking about burning more lights in your house. I'm talking digital information here. Putting down that pen and paper. Taking pictures you can't even hold in your hands. LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So I'm game. That's when Elisha becomes e-Lisha. And to tell you the truth, I can't think of a better way for a busy, wandering bunch like yourselves to share memories and our great story all the year round. And you know, we've also wandered through quite a few family names. But whether you're a Barnes, Drake, Edwards, Bailey, or Worrell, you're a Whitley if you fell off the tree from one of these family branches, or you just came here today with one. While we've even adopted a preacher or two along the way to share in this happy tradition. But it can be a sad day too, when you're reminded of all us loved ones who passed on to our eternal rest. While we may be gone, we are not separated from the spirit of this event. It gives us joy that you seek to honor your ancestors by being here today and recall our heritage. It's happened through telling our story from generation to generation. So whether you heard it in your grandma's kitchen, from across the picnic table at Winburn's Mill, through reenactments, or through these fancy gizmos called video or the internet, know that you are fulfilling a commitment to learn from each other that will keep our legacy alive forever. So there you have it, a look back at how you, my great-great-grandfamily, carries on one of America's longest running reunions. So go on now, and don't let me stop you. I want you to party like it's 1899.